start by reviewing the minutes? First of all, I'd like to note that we do have a quorum present. I wasn't here last meeting, and Mitchell wasn't either, so I think we need to rely on the board members who were here to verify that this is, in fact, an accurate representation.
Sorry?
It does indeed.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, abstained. Okay, thank you. Well, let's jump right into it then. Except, I'm so sorry. Do you have an agenda? Okay. Perfect. All right. So we've approved the minutes. We're now looking at a site plan application from the Hudson Housing Authority to build 2 4-story housing buildings with a commercial store on the first floor of one of them at 41 North Street, tax ID 109.35-2-19. So I'd like to invite the applicant's representatives to come up and make a presentation.
Would you like me here, or kind of over by the board, so I can address the public as well? And then
Here, that would be fine.
Okay.
Do that.
What's your first table?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Charles Gottlieb from the law firm of Whiteman, Osterman & Hanna in Albany, New York, here on behalf of the Hudson Housing Authority. Here this evening with me is some of the project team that you'll be hearing from a little later, including colleague Dan Hubble, also from Whiteman, Osterman & Hanna, Tim Mattice from the Hudson Housing Authority, Peter Clements from the Property Resources Corporation, known as PRC, who's also the project architect, Don McKenzie from Insight Engineering, and Brian Heeger from Dervaney Brooks, who is also going to be assisting in the development and operation of this proposal. Thank you for having us this evening. This is our initial presentation. It's an exciting new project for the City of Hudson to revitalize existing public housing, as well as creating additional public housing within the city. I'll provide a brief project description, as much as an attorney can describe a project, and I'll hand it over to the professionals. But I will also go into a little bit of detail about the procedures that we will have to abide by going forward as the board reviews this project. First, I'd like to point out this is a low-income public housing project that will provide low-income and public housing units to residents within the city. Hudson Housing Authority, HHA as it's referred to, is a public housing authority created under New York statute. The project will be constructed, leased, and operated by a public housing corporation, which will be created pursuant to New York law that will include HHA, PRC, and Dervaney Brooks. Quick overview, the project site, as you see it here, is one tax lot, but it's actually divided into 2 parcels. One on State Street, and then one on Columbia Street, with North 2nd Street running here. This is an interesting project as it will be implemented in 2 phases. The first phase is going to be on the State Street site. This requires site plan approval from your board. It's going to be 2 4-story multifamily buildings, all low-income public housing. There will be senior housing, 33 units in this building, with some commercial space on the ground level, and the remaining units will be in this building for a total of 73 units. Currently existing on this site, you have some parking and some recreational uses. The Columbia Street parcel currently has 4 buildings with the high-rise Bliss Tower. As part of the Phase 1 development, the applicant will be totally rehabbing the Bliss Tower site. The rehab of the Bliss Towers site, as we understand and it's been determined by the code enforcement officer, is not a part of the site plan review because it's a rehabilitation of an existing building. This section here, these are new units and new buildings and will require site plan review from your board. There is a phase 2 to this project, and this is where things get a little tricky and sometimes can be complicated. Phase 2 of the project is noted over there on the board that's furthest away from me, and it includes 2 additional multifamily housing projects towards the east end of this site. That is not before the planning board at this time. That is going to be a future application, but we provide the information to you now for purposes of the State Environmental Quality Review Act. The board, if it deems itself to be lead agency, will review the environmental impacts of the entire comprehensive package to avoid any, or to the entire development package, to avoid any segmentation issues.
So the board, I just want to, if I don't.
Yeah, please.
I have one question.
Sure.
You said this is going to be east of this project?
So, no, if you'll see,
It's west.
west, sorry.
West side.
Okay, all right.
East-west,
All right.
So, it matters.
yeah, of
You had
course.
me turned around there.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm a little, my apologies.
So going back to his statement about seeker, so we've all gone through the segmentation issue previously. So they're preempting that by letting us know right up front that the seeker review that you're going to do, they're going to include the impacts for full development, which is what they're required to do.
Right.
Even though they don't have permission at this time, or they're not planning on building it at this time. Right. So all of the impacts.
It's prospective.
Yes, correct. As you received in your package, we went through the zoning compliance process with the code enforcement officer. That leads us here tonight to the planning board. We are in the general commercial zoning district, both parcels. We understand in that letter there was reference to a potential subdivision of the State Street parcel and the Columbia Street parcel, so that is 2 different tax lots. Right now it's 1 tax lot, but 2 parcels. We're investigating that now, and subdivision, if it is something that the board desires, and we will certainly amend the application to include a subdivision. Currently, we are also undergoing some financing reviews related to public housing financing with HUD and the state, and they might require for the future phase 2 a subdivision line to be drawn, and we are reviewing whether or not a division of this parcel will be necessary for financing purposes. As I mentioned, the Housing Authority is a public housing authority created under New York statute, so it's governed by the Public Housing Law. Public Housing Law Section 150 sets up a very different procedure that will run concurrently with your site plan review. It requires the Public Housing Authority to first come to the planning board, reviews the project as you would during your site plan review, and then issue a report. That report will then go to the City Council for final approval. In speaking with Planning Board Council and Corporation Council, it is our understanding that the city would like the Planning Board to complete its review process, and then once it's completely reviewed and approved or determined by the Planning Board, will then make its way up to the City Council. We're happy to answer any questions about that public housing law procedure. It's set forth in Public Housing Law Section 150. As far as SECR is concerned, like I mentioned, your SECR review will be of the entire development, the master plan, which is demonstrated over there. We are currently undergoing some environmental impacts. We're looking at traffic, we're looking at drainage, we're looking at any potential impact that there might be, and we will provide the board with a SECR narrative that explains potential impacts and any mitigation that might be necessary. And certainly we will obtain comments from the planning board, city consultants and engineers throughout that process and address anything that we need to.
So just, if you don't mind. So if you look at the seeker application that was submitted, there were some items that were not filled in yet, and that's simply because they weren't ready to. So that's what he's referring to. Obviously, traffic will be, I would suspect, a big issue with this board. So we don't have that information yet. So they're not looking right now to let you think that it's done and that you should deem this complete and start doing public hearings. We have a long way to go before that happens. Do you know when you anticipate having those narratives?
So we have been working with Wendy Holzberger from VHB, who will be our traffic consultant. She is in the process of finalizing her report now. Don is working on preparing a expanded environmental assessment report that will kind of come in conjunction with the EAF that we submitted. We are hoping to submit it in time for the next planning board meeting to keep things going, so you would be able to review it then. And we will certainly update the board as we go forward. I think, was it last week, we had some geotech folks on the site taking some soil samples and so forth. So the wheels are in motion. We're just making sure we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's. As far as SECR goes this evening, I outlined this in our letter. If the planning board feels it necessary, SECR says that the lead agency should declare its intent as early on as possible. So this would be, it's our understanding, it would be a type 1 action and will require coordinated review. And that's because of the new SECR regulations that are going to go into effect in January 2019. As there are a lot of historic properties in the city of Hudson, and we are proposing 73 units in phase 1. We believe type 1 action is what we have here. If the planning board this evening would like to declare its intent to be lead agency, they should do so, and we can begin the circulation process. That circulation process is you would just send a letter and the application package to all the other involved agencies. The city council, HUD, well not HUD, they're federal, but the state agencies that would require approval. And so everyone can take a look at this, but it would be up to the planning board to make the secret determination as we go down the road.
So we can certainly discuss if they want to be lead, but generally that letter requires all those items. You said we don't have them complete yet. I'm a little bit hesitant to send them the secret that we have with all the blanks in it. So we need to talk about the timing. I would rather wait until you submit everything to us so we have an entire package to give them rather than have to do a second submission. We can talk about that if you think that poses a problem.
I agree with all the board.
Why would we
Yeah.
send around incomplete?
Yeah, and I think that would be to your advantage too.
Yep, and we can talk about it offline. SECR does require that this process is done as early as possible, and that usually you circulate your application, your plans, and your environmental assessment form, albeit early in the process. But certainly it's something we can work out. And there is no hurry, and we can kind of figure that out. So if there are, I'm sure there'll be more questions, but I can hand it over to Peter to kind of bring you through some of the design elements. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just a little confused about, and this may not be the place to ask the question. You're calling this a public housing development, but, and all I know really is what I've read in the papers. It's really public-private and 60% privately owned?
So Brian,
Is that true?
Brian can get into some more information about that.
Okay.
He is the public housing expert. But this is, the entity that's being formed is being formed for public housing purposes. This is a public housing project. These units will remain public housing units. If there was any proposal of different, this would not be the application before you. So this is wholeheartedly a public housing project. The application before you is a public housing project, so the units will all be low-income public housing. If there are any different, then the procedure I outlined before would not be necessary.
When you say low income, what AMI ranges are going to be used for this project, or have they proposed?
Sure, and so after Peter does the design elements of things, Brian will get into those specific questions. Sure.
I have a question on seeker impact and the whole notion of avoiding segmentation by showing us your other projects down the road. but if you don't have designs or sizes or specific design elements of that, how can we determine impacts?
Sure, so SECR requires us, although it may be speculative in some nature, to study the impacts. When we then come back for site plan review for those additional units, which will be an amended site plan, if they are in any way different than the impacts that you studied here and now, they will then get restudied at that moment.
So there's an anticipation of what they will be. Hopefully they put it at a high level because they don't want to have to go through SECR again. So it's kind of a generic approval at this point on that phase. When they have to come back to site plan approval because we're not giving them site plan approval for that because it's not before us, so they don't know. When that comes back and we say, wait a minute, the SECR that you did back in January or February 2019 didn't contemplate all of this traffic or whatever it might be, then you say that SECR's not applicable anymore, you have to update it, and then you would have it.
Do you have an estimated number of units, et cetera?
We do. Well, right now, it is estimated to be, I believe, no more than 80 units for the combined, which would be new. And that's what we would have our projections for as far as studying traffic impacts. Traffic impacts aren't just going to be studied for these units, it's going to be studied for that plan over there.
So it's additional 80 units in those two new buildings?
Right, and that is speculative, but that's a high number because we want to make sure we are doing a conservative analysis.
And that also
80, you
is
said?
Correct.
is low income?
Correct, yes.
And is it also senior?
I would have to hand that over. I think right now that is speculative, so it's not the intent. But right now, this would be the only senior building, which would be 33 units.
And this new one will be 7 units? No,
This,
not that. The one to the west of it.
so yeah, in those two buildings, the total, right now it's speculative, but a conservative assumption would be 80 units.
Okay, because I see 73 here.
Correct.
Right. No, I understand that, but with the other, with the second component of it, it may be premature to ask this.
Sure.
There'll be only 7 units in that one?
No, another additional 80.
Another
150.
So you'd have
So the
70.
traffic
I
impact,
misunderstood.
so
Sorry.
what their SECR analysis is going to be based on 153
Gotcha,
units.
okay. Thank you.
So I'll hand it over to Peter to run through the plans a little bit in more detail. And then if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to come on back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm Peter Clements. I'm licensed architect, in-house architect for Property Resources Corporation, and also the executive of the Construction Management Division of PRC. And one of my project architects, Jojo Fernandez, is also one of the architects on this project. Just a little background about PRC. The company has been in existence for over 45 years, has really, for its entire history, been primarily focused on affordable housing, primarily in the New York metro area, but have, over its history, also done work in the DC metro area and larger Philadelphia. And we are currently also working with the public housing authorities in Yonkers and New Rochelle. And actually, New Rochelle, it's a RAD project quite similar in nature to the Bliss Tower project, with the rehabilitation of 2 towers that are approximately 100 units apiece. So it's a pleasure to walk you through our proposal for the project we have before you. What we're looking at is a site plan that lays out the proposed 2 new buildings, the 4-story senior housing building that would have 33 residential units. That's a combination of studio and 1-bedroom apartments, as well as retail at the first floor fronting onto 2nd Street, and a little more than half of the elevation facing State Street. And then a family housing building that would range from 1-bedroom to 3-bedroom units, and some studios as well, right, Jojo?
No studio.
No studios. Okay, so it's 1 to 3 bedrooms, and it's a total of 40 apartments in the 4-story development. There's proposed parking that would be entered from 2nd Street and accommodate 25 parking spaces, as well as a trash pickup area for the senior housing building. And then there would be an arrangement for trash pickup for the multifamily housing building that enters off of State Street. Also a courtyard area that's proposed between the two buildings that would have a area for display of public art, as well as seating and kind of recreational relaxation space there. In terms of the overview of the project, we are also planning to do a comprehensive rehabilitation of the Bliss Tower building also. We're talking about relocating the primary entrance of Bliss Tower, which is presently facing towards 2nd Street, over to the State Street side. There's an existing entrance there, but it doesn't have sort of a primary nature. So and right now, the garbage pickup for Bliss is facing in this direction towards State Street, so it's kind of conflicts a little with the residential entry function. Our proposal is to reconfigure the arrangement of spaces in the first floor of Bliss so that the garbage can be taken out and picked up with an entrance off of 2nd Street, allowing for a more focused residential character on the State Street side. We're also proposing to expand the parking lot on that's currently on Columbia Street to wrap onto 2nd Street, allowing an entrance here that connects, and a pick-up and drop-off area here for the future use of the first floor of Bliss Tower on that side. Also proposing, as part of this project, the development of playground and recreational space in the backyard of the Bliss Tower. And also should note that there is currently a maintenance garage on the State Street site in this approximate area here that is within the proposed footprint of the family housing development. So we're proposing early in the process to construct a new maintenance garage over in the existing parking lot at the west end of Columbia Street. That can be, the permanent location of that garage for the duration of construction, and also ultimately, if there's a phase 2, it could remain at that location. So let me turn to the proposed buildings. The proposal is to have commercial space on the corner at the first floor at the intersection of State and 2nd, and the residential entrance beyond that here, to have a combination of brick materials for the facade of this building with a clapboard type siding, and to use those two materials on the construction of both of the new buildings, and pitched roofs and double hung windows. The idea for the cladding of the Bliss Tower project is to use a similar panelized brick for recladding portions of the facade of Bliss Tower, and Then another, Joe, do you want to just sort of pull that board over so everybody can see a little better? Another panelized material for the cladding of the remainder of the building on the upper reaches of the facade. It seemed like the use of a common material in part between the two buildings would establish a relationship that would be a positive thing. So I'd be happy to go into more detail about any of the particulars of the buildings. If you would like that now.
I'm a little confused, I'm probably not oriented correctly.
Sure.
I'm looking at this bottom right,
Yes.
and I see the senior building is the one that's on 7th and State. All right, and am I looking at State there?
You're looking down State Street. So there's a photograph to the left. That's
Right,
the
what-
existing
what-
condition.
now?
And this is sort of the same view
Right,
after construction. So the Bliss Tower that you see at the left of the photo, that would be the redeveloped facade of the tower, and then the new buildings to the right.
so what I'm a little confused about is then the building behind the senior building.
Yep.
Looks as if it's right next to it, but looking at the, whatever you call it. Yeah, the site plan, it looks as if there's room, grassy area, I don't know what's
Right,
there.
so we did not draw, everything that's drawn there on the left side of that drawing is the Bliss Tower. We have not depicted,
Can I help you out? Because
Sure.
I think I know what the problem is.
yep,
The clapboard, which you added, is
Okay.
on the seniors building.
Right,
And then the gap is just
After.
past that. And then you see there's a gap between that yellow clapboard and
You're
the
looking
red.
up this way on this. So this is
The
all
white
part of
building.
that first building. The reason why they have different
Oh.
colors is because
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the retail space.
thank
Right,
you.
So that's the
This is-
senior, and then
One building.
that's the
then there's
space
the
there.
gap, and then there's the
Ah.
family
See
building.
the space with, the space
Got it.
is
I'm
here.
sorry, I didn't quite understand.
I'm sorry.
This is the
Well, I
senior
get it now.
building from here to here.
Oh, but they're just different.
There's two different materials that are part of the same, and similarly, the second building has the same two materials
I was seeing
interspersed.
two different
Yeah,
buildings
I know.
instead of a single building. Thank you.
And what, because you changed the proposal from the original one with all brick, what was the thinking behind that?
So, we've been both developing the design internally and also been in dialogue with the community. And it was a combination of trying to respond to questions and suggestions that were made, as well as, analysis of the budget for the project, that, those kind of seem to both support the idea of, rather than having a kind of monolithic brick facade, to break it up with different materials, and that could also achieve some economies in the construction costs.
Question, comment. I had the good fortune of attending the public shred sessions, or the shred, and then the meeting after, and had some comments, which I guess I'll say, maybe some more detailed comments. It seemed to me, observing that charrette, there was a number of public comments, a significant number of public comments, and kudos to you guys for doing that. It seems like there were many that were not included in your changes of design, and I guess it would be very interesting to have a full summary of what the public comments were, and then indication which ones were included, which ones weren't, and for what reason. And it does seem to me that the public sessions were, for lack of a better word, quite rushed. And there was one session which was a charrette in terms of, one would think of charrette as being an original design concept. And really between the first meeting with the presentation of the building and the second meeting, there was essentially some tweaking of a design that was presented. My understanding of a charrette is you start from square one and you do some notions of what the building is. So the design evolution has been pretty minor, And there's no clear indication to me that the clear public comments that came out as part of the public charrette were included significantly. And I think it would be useful for you to respond to those. I do think that there's some changes that can be made to it, again, based on those public comments that would not be expensive or in fact to save money, that could reflect some of those public concerns. I'm not here to report all the public concerns, but you guys, I feel, should be reporting on what the public concerns are, and then reporting back to the public how you respond to those. It does seem like those two sessions, the first one I think was quite good, the second one was essentially, here's some minor tweaks to a design that we presented, and I do think that there was some community concern about moving it too quickly and having a design that was presented almost as a finished product with some tweaking, and I don't really feel that that's what a charrette should be. And I guess that's sort of a general comment, but also the question is, where is the design now in terms of its finality? I mean, how clearly you're presenting here. I think that there's ways to tweak it, again, based mainly on public concern, that would make it a much better project. But I would hope that you would be open to responding to those effectively and comprehensively.
Anybody else? Any questions?
I mean, I would echo what Clark said, and some of us just came from an urban design presentation by some students from the university. And
Can you speak up more?
one of the concerns was combined sewage outflows, and there's a lot of hardscape on here, and there's a lot of units being added to an infrastructure that's already having trouble. So I'm wondering if, having green roofs or some other features that would mitigate, that problem could be added or have been considered.
So Dawn is our landscape architect and is part of the civil engineering team on the project. And would you like to respond to the question, Dawn?
I can certainly try. So first you brought up something about green roofs, and
That's more architecture.
yeah, that's more architectural. So
But in terms of
it's directly
hardscape
tied into the problem with the combined sewage overflow problem that we have.
So I think I can actually help out on this one. Stormwater impacts, management of stormwater, sewage, inflow, outflow, these are all going to be secret considerations. We're studying those now, and it is a potential impact that we have identified, and then certainly the board has now identified, and we will address. So this is why we came here tonight, to get these type of comments in a future submission, hopefully before the next meeting. We will have written responses, and our engineering team will be able to address it.
So while you're up here,
Yes.
let's go to Clark's previous comment. We could get the public back here during our public hearing and have them rehash that and do it under that way.
Gotcha.
It would seem to me much more efficient if you respond to his comment, hopefully positively by saying you do have some kind of notes or tape or something of those comments and the responses, so we can head that off and not have to delay.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we will do, when we go back and get ready for our next mission, we will do a response to comments. Generally, what we received at the charrette. One thing I would like to make note of is those community meetings were intended to get those comments. As a applicant, we digested those comments. We looked at what was feasible, what we thought was best for the project, what would allow the project to move forward. We also wanted to get before your board to get your comments. As the application stands, this is the application. It will be determined within the parameters of the zoning code and your site plan review, and we are happy to respond to comments and provide any feedback we can.
Well, when will you do that?
So timing is always a question.
So it's a little hard now, just, we've had this discussion because especially when we get the narrative and the seeker, we're gonna need the city engineer to look at it. So we're running, it's already the 13th. 1 week is pretty much no business. The meeting, no, so.
I'm not interrupting.
No, I'm just saying, they want to have it for us, the January meeting, and I told him in order to do that, he's basically going to have it before New Year's, because that's our rule, that far in advance. And they may not be able to, but that's for them to determine based on their schedule, yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
just
we
ask
will,
you a question.
yeah, certainly.
Clark raised issues.
We will, we have a lot to digest. It was our intent to get before the board soon, so we can get these types of comments, so that when we do come back, we can address as many comments as you have. A lot of these, it takes time, and we will come back with, more submissions.
No, I understand that. I worked for the city of New York for 30 years and sort of in this area. But, so to Clark's point, you analyzed what people said, you adjusted it, blah, blah. But in the comments that you come back to for us, will you include some at least summary of the issues that the public raised?
Yes, we will. We will do that in addition to
Okay.
these secret
So
impediments.
what he said, reading between, turning the lines, is that he will give you the responses from Ms. Red and the comments, but if they don't want to go that route,
Oh,
this
I
is
get
their
that.
application based
Okay.
on the standard, okay, just so.
Understood.
There's no,
You're presenting what you're presenting.
Right, and we will respond to comments as we go forward and tweak what we
I
can.
don't have a problem with this.
One other general comment, which also came up in the public session, is that we're the planning board, we're in favor of planning. I sometimes have the maybe critical comment that we're not the project review board, but we're the planning board, so we should encourage planning, and I do think that one thing we should keep in mind, which was a key comment in the public session, was how the plan overall, how this building interacts with Bliss, how it fits in with the rest of the neighborhood, how it interacts with the neighborhood, how residents are going to be using it and making it seem like it's an urban space, not just a public housing project. Those are all very, very important. And I think, again, I don't mean to reiterate all the public comments, which I could spend the next hour doing, which I will.
that's directly under secret, Clark, you have every right to ask that.
Right, so I would hope that you would be open to design adjustments based on those comments, which again would not be difficult or expensive to make it a better project. Thank you.
You could just hire him if you want.
Love it for free.
They'll tell you what to do.
We have a lot of talent in town that can help out a lot, and I hope that you are open to those comments.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
We have a lot of talent in Hudson that has expertise in urban planning, and we should, I would recommend, suggest that you tap into that and not reject it.
I just want to make one comment, and then we'll roll. Mitchell and I had an interesting exchange about the planning board's role, the proper role, what we can do and cannot do. You're absolutely legally prescribed to stay within a very tight little box, but I would like to say, for the benefit of everybody, that I'm a great believer that we are citizens as well, and we should be able to express every and all opinions on any matter that we feel. Like if I don't like purple, I get to say I don't like purple. You're not legally required to go with the fact that I don't like purple, but we have the right to say it. So I would just encourage everybody to speak freely.
This is, to change the subject completely, what's a red conversion? Can you explain that in layman's terms? So we
Yeah,
understand?
that actually is a perfect segue, because that's Brian's expertise.
I was trying to figure out how to make that segue, so thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Heeger. I'm with DuVernay Brooks. We're
Brian Eager?
Heeger, yes, H-E-E-G-E-R. We're partners with the Hudson Housing Authority and PRC on this redevelopment. My firm's a small affordable housing development firm based in New York City. It's a New York State certified woman-owned business. And we have a specialty of working with housing authorities across the country on doing redevelopment, both as a consultant and as a co-developer partner. So this project, like a project we're working on with PRC in New Rochelle, and we're working in Yonkers and across the country, is being redeveloped under the HUD RAD program. So RAD stands for Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. It was created in the last federal administration because public housing across the country has suffered from budget cuts and disinvestment for decades. So now has a tens of billions of dollars capital shortfall need, and tens of thousands of units of public housing are at risk of being lost every year. So that administration came up with the RAD program. It is now really no longer a demonstration program. In the last federal budget, the cap on the number of units was greatly increased, and HUD is pushing forward on encouraging housing authorities to move forward with RAD conversions as quickly as possible. The reason for doing so is RAD creates a more stable funding platform for housing authorities, and unlike public housing, it enables them to partner better, more easily with the private sector to leverage financing to do the capital we invest in the buildings that the federal government has not funded. So we're able to access debt and equity markets to redevelop the buildings. So this project, similar to the ones in New Rochelle and others, the existing tower, Bliss Towers, will go through this RAD conversion and financing. And at the same time, we're going to include the new construction on State Street as part of the same financial transaction, and it will be structured as someone mentioned, the same public-private partnership. But it's it's important to remember that the land will always be owned by the housing authority. It's never going to enter into private hands. The housing authority is always going to remain a member of the ownership, and after there's an initial compliance period with the state for certain these funding programs of 15 years, the housing authority has the option to take over back sole ownership. There are numerous protections and regulatory restrictions at the federal level, state and local level, to protect the residents. So none of the existing residents, public housing residents at Bliss Tower will be displaced. All residents in good standing can remain or return to the site after their units are renovated. Their rents will remain under the same formulas that they're now under public housing, which is essentially 30% of their income for rent. So they're not going to see the programs, although it transitions the programs to access financing and funding, it does not impact the residents financially from that perspective. Then the new buildings will include, the senior building is also targeted to similar income level, same income level as Bliss Tower, very low income. And residents at Bliss Tower have the option of moving to the new senior building at Bliss, opening up units at Bliss for people currently on the Housing Authority wait list to move into Bliss Tower. So expanding the Housing Authority's portfolio of very low income units. And then the family building will have a range of what they call AMIs, income tiers, affordable or workforce housing ranging from 50% of area median income up to 65% of area median income is our initial projections. And again, the state will require affordability on those units for a minimum of 40 years. The RAD units are restricted by HUD really in perpetuity. There's a 20-year contracts, but what they call housing assistance payment contracts, but they automatically renew every 20 years. So those will remain affordable perpetuity. At the end of the ground lease, all the buildings and property reverts back to the Housing Authority ownership. So there are many areas where the Housing Authority retains control. Housing Authority is looking at also continuing to be the managing agent and operating the properties on a day-to-day basis. So the Housing Authority will remain in control of the properties, remain in legal control of the properties, and there are many federal, state, and local affordability restrictions to ensure that the residents are protected. So I know that's a lot of technical jargon to absorb, but that's the main point.
Does that mean all the units will be affordable?
All the units will be affordable. All the RAD units will be affordable for as long as public housing exists, the federal government. The other tax credit units will remain as affordable as long as the housing authority chooses, because they have the right to take over the ownership of the properties after 15 years. And then at the end of the ground lease, all the buildings go back to the housing authority, so they can then choose what to, how to proceed.
What's the term of the ground lease?
We haven't finalized that. It'll be a long-term ground lease. Those are typically 65 years, at least 65 years.
But in 15 years, the housing authority could take ownership.
Yeah, they could take over sole ownership. There are tax credit investors, if you know that program, who participate. After 15 years, they exit, and the housing authority can take over sole ownership, and we would exit as well if we wanted to.
The city of Hudson recently developed a strategic housing action plan, and I'm wondering if you've had a chance to review it, and that's one question. The other is related, which has to do that these AMIs are at 50 to 65%, which is, well, 50 is generally considered low to very low, and then 65, needs for a greater mix of incomes at a moderate to middle income level have been determined, and I'm wondering, again, one, why this is restricted to a very low tier, especially when concerns have been expressed by members of the community that affordable housing, different kinds of affordable housing need to be in Hudson, and also in different areas of the city. Because it's, to date, nearly all of it, the bulk of it, I should say, has been concentrated in one area, and that's been a concern for some people.
Yeah, well, so the Bliss Tower itself and the senior property will be, below the 50%. Current public housing rents and incomes are well below the 50% of area median income. So the idea that the housing authority, the goal it had for the family was to introduce more of a diversity of incomes. Under those financing programs, we are allowed, there is a little flexibility to do that. We're also working with the state and what the state wants to see, and so they like to see a range of 50% of AMI upwards. We have a market study that expressed some concerns about going higher than 65% for these type of tax credit rental properties that it would be competing with. So we're still working on that with the state and looking at the economics of that, so there's still some flexibility to change that. On average, we were targeting about 60% of AMI average for that family development.
Which is still considered...
It's affordable housing, but that's
considered low, and
yeah.
Again, my concern is that's not a diversity of income for this area at all, and a need for more mix of incomes in this particular area has been expressed and identified and needs to be addressed, and it's not addressed here.
So what we will do, this is, although it might not seem it, this is a secret impact. This is a community impact that we are now assessing, and we will respond to these comments. We're looking at compliance with the strategic plan that you mentioned. We're looking at compliance with the city comprehensive plan and the needs in this area. Why this development is where it is like any applicant. This is the land that Hudson Housing Authority owns, and through our analysis, which we will describe further as we go through this process, this is the housing that is needed here.
That's where my question comes in. Was there an assessment done that said that this is the housing that's needed here? What study was done that tells? I'm not doubting you, I'm just wondering what that determined.
We are finalizing that. That's what Brian here is the expert on.
Are you starting a project without already knowing that?
We have a market study, or a preliminary market study that we're finalizing that showed enormous demand for affordable housing at the ranges of the workforce housing.
And who did the market study?
It's a third party.
The community, are you going to see that?
This will, so internally, of course, a market study was done as any developer or applicant would do prior to going this far down the road. When we do our next submission and our secret studies, we will lay out all of that information. What is the need? How did we conclude that need? And how did we come about this? I can't stress enough, the reason why we're here tonight is because we wanted to come before the planning board at this stage to get these exact types of comments so that we can then respond to them thoroughly. So that is a noted comment, and we will absolutely respond.
Just to kind of expand on that a little bit. You know, as other wonderful board members have mentioned, I mean, there are entities and groups and people working on, you know, housing needs, you know, what we need here in this community. And again, I'm not saying that I doubt you, but I just wonder who in the community has been approached for their input in terms of, you know, what the housing needs are here. And it seems as though it's possible that a project is started and then you assess what the needs are, rather than, you know, the needs being looked at and then a project developed. I'm just questioning if that's the case.
Sure.
And I don't know if anybody wants to add to that or make more sense out of what I just said.
I just want to add that, based on my experience in developing affordable housing and real estate developers in general, you know, it's often a case of the tail wagging the dog. You find available funding sources or funding sources that are appealing, and then construct a project around it and justify it. And I'm not saying that's the case here, it could be, but you know, that would be a concern of mine, you know, having the project being driven by what the most appealing or available funding sources are, rather than looking at what this community and what this neighborhood really needs and what it's said it's needed, you know, many times, particularly in the past couple of years, and that's been documented by other professionally done studies.
And looks at the current people that are living in and around Hudson. You know, the wonderful people that are working here and living here, but we'd like them to stay. But they can't afford housing, but they probably also wouldn't qualify, you know, for the income bracket that you're looking at. I just want to throw out, since I'm the aunt and legal guardian for an adult nephew who's autistic, that it also would be wonderful if there was some inclusion for people with developmental disabilities, which there's also funding sources for. I'm just throwing that out. It's a personal thing, but I know that there's a lot of housing needs for the elderly, but there also are others. But I want to just go back to the people that are not developmentally disabled or elderly. You know, the people that are working in our shops and in our artistic spaces and in agriculture. You know, the people that make Hudson in our general area so wonderful truly can't afford housing. And so I guess that's why I say to develop such a massive project, which is in so many ways wonderful, to not look at the specific needs of the people that are living and working here, I think is a little worrisome.
So what we will do, your comments are heard, and I completely understand that. We will, at future meetings, share with you the process that was conducted by our team prior to any of the things you're seeing here on the boards taking place. There was an RFP process that was done by Hudson Housing Authority to look at these sites and to do such a study. We will share those preliminary results with you, and then from there, those results that we share are also, you're able to comment on those, and we can explain further. This is just the start line, and we will continue on, but these are great comments, and we will certainly resolve them.
I know nothing about public housing and the parameters. Because this is property that is owned by the Housing Authority, is there an upper limit of income that HHA ownership defines?
I believe it would just be, I don't exactly understand the question. So you mean as far as maybe a restriction on
clearly,
property owned by Hudson
what
Housing?
you're talking about is that this is skewed to very low income residents. So I'm just curious, if by definition, if the Housing Authority owns it, are they limited in the population they can serve?
So Dan Hubble, I'm counsel for the Housing Authority on the transactional side of this. So this is Housing Authority land. They have a purpose, they have a mission for which they were created by the city of Hudson back when they were created decades ago. And so from the standpoint of looking, that if the planning board or the city is looking for the housing authority to do something that would contradict that purpose of the housing authority, that could be an issue.
So my question is-
So, you know, the housing authority was created to provide public housing to the city of Hudson. And so this project fits within that definition. To the extent that you're looking for us to do a project beyond that, so market rate housing or a different level of housing, we haven't looked at that. We would have to look at that, and we'd have to look at what kind of ramifications that would mean both for the housing authority. This land is under a declaration of covenants with HUD. So HUD has an interest in this property right now, and so it would have to be cleared through HUD. So to the extent that you're asking to do
My
that.
question
Right.
is there a ceiling of a percent of, what is it, average median income? Or whatever, that you can't, because it's a property that you can't exceed?
I think the answer is yes, but do you know what it is?
And what is that ceiling, my question?
Yeah, every program that we're in has a limit. You know, to the extent that you want to get the limits as to what these are, we can provide it for you.
So my question would be, you know, apart from the RAD program, I know that from developing affordable housing, that the capital stack usually includes many funding sources with many different programs, each with their, you know, set of requirements, which, you know, which can be very complicated to put together. But, you know, there are programs that are above 65% of AMI that could be tapped and that are considered affordable housing. Whereas this range is, you know, again, is not very diverse for the area and for the kinds of.
I think that's what you're addressing.
I just want to know, what is the upper range of income in terms of percentage?
For the financing program that we are applying, what we intend to apply for, it would be that 65%, right?
What are those programs? Are
Yeah,
they in RAD?
under the RAD program, it's 50% of the residents are grandfathered in and can't be displaced. For the tax credit, the family building, the tax credit units, now technically can go to 80%, as long as the average in the building doesn't exceed 60%. However, we did a market study, and there was concern by the market analysts about going that high, and that's how we targeted 65%.
When you say market study,
It was
a market study for Hudson?
for the project, based on the Hudson, based on the area and around.
Based on the
city of
people
Hudson.
that live here?
Yes, yes. that's
And
right.
so between this project and the one that will come later at some point, that's about 160 units? Am I correct about that?
It's 153.
Okay, so.
New units.
Huh?
Right, the Bliss units are
New
remaining.
units, and then there's the rehab. But I'm gonna leave the rehab out of it, if we can go to the new ones. And so, I mean, again, I know this is not my field, and so you don't have to explain everything to me, but just in layman's terms, my question is, do you actually identify that we need 153 units for people of very low income?
We didn't, the market study, the analysis did not look at phase 2, so we haven't, that's very speculative, that's a very hypothetical. You know, when we say 80 units there, that's solely from a planning perspective of what could fit on the site. So we haven't looked at that. As far as the existing 73, yes, there was shown an enormous need at those income levels.
Of people that currently live here?
Yes.
Because I think one of the things that I get a little nervous about is that, you know, does a project such as this serve the people that are here now?
It looked at vacancy and capture rates for the immediate primary market area. I can't remember off the top of my head, you know, how far out that went, but it was fairly restrictive, so we can provide you more information on that.
And I can't stress enough that with this application, you are not approving 150 new units.
I understand
Yeah, you'd be approving the 73, and we'll provide you the analysis that was conducted.
I have a follow-up question. I mean, this is for HHA board. Clearly, you guys have a range, a very narrow range for the project, based on the funding stream. Mark seems to be a resident expert here on the board related to public housing, but there's a question of, my strong sense is housing people within that range in a very small neighborhood or very small zone could be very problematic, and even at the meetings, members of the Bliss Tower were articulate in saying we would like to have more mixed housing and more mixed incomes, that I talked to people privately. And it seems like that overall is good policy and a good plan to have not just one low-income neighborhood in Hudson. I would ask the board whether there are funding sources that would allow you to boost the income range based on AMI. And I don't know, I think that's a question more for the board or for Tim on whether that's a possibility to not just have the funding availability drive the development, but Hudson's needs drive the development.
And from what I'm hearing, that's the overarching question that we will certainly address once we digest these comments.
I mean, we could provide more detail on the income ranges that we're targeting. Really it's from our perspective and our history of working in this industry, that tax credit, the family project is workforce housing. I mean, it's not, I know in some categories, look at 50% is very low income, but these are, people have to have, are working and paying rent, have, compete, have a choice of places to live in the marketplace, and so, we'll provide that more information.
A comment which, I don't want to get into something that's not relevant here, but a lot of us have been talking about the zoning currently in Hudson, and one of the problems we've seen is with consolidations that occur and the tendency to make larger and larger lots, single-family homes, more expensive homes. You really have very few areas where the zoning permits a kind of concentration where the economics start to suggest that you could produce this type of housing within a kind of plausible envelope. So we're hoisted on our own petard. And my own personal view of this is while I do not in any way support the idea of concentrating a large number of people in what could be perceived as a kind of area, concentrated area, this really, Hudson is a small city, but we're talking about one block. And it happens to be one block because it was zoned for public housing that allows this to occur. So I'm assuming if the Housing Authority did want to do something in another part of town, they'd find it was prohibited by the zoning. So I think we have to be very careful to look at the present and the future and assess what our present needs are. So if we are convinced by their numbers that the demand exists within the community, that we're not, I think the subtext here is we don't want to draw people from far out of Hudson because, hey, I can get an apartment in Hudson. We want to serve first the needs of the people here. We're just going to have to be very balanced as a board and make some trade-off decisions about what's practical.
But it doesn't mean that this project, even though everything that you just said, so I don't have to try to repeat it, can't think a little bit outside the box, and that a diverse community isn't, isn't better for everybody.
It's much better.
Again, just to clarify, so what are the funding sources for this project? There's RAG, there's LIHTC.
Yeah, so there's, and one of the reasons the Housing Authority wants to move forward on the project is the state now has a program called Public Housing Preservation that's specifically funded to help housing authorities convert to RAD. It's very competitive funding, and they're limited, so that's part of the reason why the Housing Authority went out for the RFP as it did to move forward with this. In addition to that, we're looking at the state new construction program for the family units. That would be the 50 to 65%. And the, as you said, tax credits, the federal tax credit program. And it's all under tax, those are, if you want to get very technical, 4% credits, because it would be the taxes and bond financing from New York State. We're working New York State Housing Finance Agency on that. And the last source, I think, is the DRI funds from the state of New York as well, Downtown Revitalization Initiative funds.
So there's RAD, LIHTC, this public housing preservation.
Yeah, PHP.
State new construction,
Yeah,
and
and
DRI, so there are 5 sources of capital.
Yes, and plus, yeah.
Each with its
a
own set of
deferred fee.
restrictions and, okay.
And then there's the private funding.
Yeah, well, the tax credit funding or private investors, you sell the tax credits to them.
So tonight we don't invite the public.
So is there more?
No,
This was an
No,
excellent
just wanted to
exercise.
check that
This is an
you have so
excellent
many
exercise,
people here.
and I
just wanted to make sure
appreciate,
we weren't cutting anybody off.
the board's comments, and that's why we came here, to get these types of comments so we can respond and keep this process going.
I have another comment. This is maybe for Walter and the board overall, which is my understanding is that Hudson is now approaching a moment where we're going to revisit our comprehensive plan and zoning, et cetera. And I think there's a sense that this should comply even though we don't really know what that is, and that would be essentially kicking the can down the road. But I think there's concern that this project is right on the cusp of a new comprehensive plan for Hudson, and whether we feel it's appropriate to have this project comply with that.
Well, there's some legal questions that we could go into. I guess a general comment is I've been also tracking this project. You know, it's very interesting for a number of reasons. They really have adopted a number of new urbanist strategies already. I mean, this is not public housing, anything like you would have seen 20 years ago. I mean, the ironic Mark's comment, which I agree is a very good comment, but 20 years ago it would have had a flat roof because that was the most economical thing to do. So there's a certain look. And in my mind, this gets away from the kind of fortified, don't go there, if you walk on that grass, nobody will say anything, but you really shouldn't kind of place that we've come to know through Bliss Tower. This is, I think, a very well-intentioned attempt to take us into another place. And so I love to say, it's my new favorite cliche, the perfect is the enemy of the good.
But that, wonderful comments, but that doesn't really talk about what he just said.
Well,
They have a
my
right
response
under
is they
law.
have already,
Oh.
They have a right under law to put in their application, this is their application.
yeah.
You have no authority to delay it unreasonably. You certainly are allowed to ask for all the information that you've been asking for. You can do a comprehensive review of everything, and they will respond accordingly.
But again, my remark, because I think Clark said something significant, is I hope we're going to try and encourage everybody who comes before the board to start treating planning with outside of the box, to put it that way. And, you know, in my mind, this already has taken some steps in that direction. So we can see if we can push it a little further.
What is the total development cost of this project?
We'll address that in future questions. We'll kind of go back through the theme, as our list of comments grows.
Well, they're not going to answer that question. I'm just letting you know, they're not going to answer that question. It's a little unusual to ask. It's not under secret analysis. It's not, we can talk about that later, but don't expect an answer, they're not going to give it to you.
But they might answer it.
Well, they might not give it to us, but all this talk about it being a public project, there should be some sense of transparency.
Let's not confuse HHH rules and regulations and their policy that they have to follow with what the planning board's authority and the code that we have to follow. So I'll just leave it at that.
We will provide as much information to the extent that the Housing Authority, the Housing Authority is a governmental agency that has its own rules and regulations, and we have to abide by those as well. And we will provide as much information as we can, and certainly be as open and transparent as those regulations allow us to.
And speaking of house cleaning and procedures, do you want to speak a little bit about what we're going to need in terms, or do you want to discuss that separately in terms of escrow and all of this?
We should absolutely do that now with them now.
Yeah.
So we have, our code allows for attorney, engineer, and other professional reviews. What I'd like to do is when you get a completed seeker, I'd like to approach our city engineer and get an estimate from him, what he thinks would be appropriate amount. I'll give you one. To be honest, I don't think this is as much legal as it is engineering side, and then you'll have to do that. We'll sign, we have a standard city agreement that we've been using. I'll give you a draft, we could work on that, we'll get the numbers, and then that should be deposited hopefully before the next meeting so the professionals could do the review that you're asking to do.
Okay.
All right. The other thing I would ask this board, I think you've already agreed, but I would rather you not decide now. I mean, you could decide if you want to be lead agency, I think you should. I think that's appropriate. And if you want to make that decision, you can make that decision. But I wouldn't want to give notice to the other involved agencies, as they're called, and interested agencies on the seeker, until we have a complete, I think we're far off from having a complete application at this point. It's my personal opinion, but it's up to you to decide that. I'd rather give them everything so they know exactly what project you'll be reviewing, so they could review that and have any comments given to you. So we would have to send out a notice that we would want to be the lead agency on the coordinated review. We would give them 30 days to say no or not. I can't imagine looking at the list, and I'll have the attorneys go through that with me, but we could start drafting that if we get the consensus from this board that you would want to be lead agency.
Well, I heard you say we shouldn't make the final decision until we have a completed secret.
I don't want to send the notices out.
So we'll have
We
a
agree with that.
conceptual discussion, and conceptually, how do you all feel about that?
You should be lead, right?
We should be, yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
So conceptually, we would like to be lead agency, and we'll...
I'll start preparing the documents accordingly. That's why I wanted to know, so I don't want to spin wheels.
Do we need to go on that, or that's just?
No, we're good. We'll make a formal decision once we deem this a little bit further along the line, and then we'll send it out.
Just to clarify, the board will make a formal decision to declare itself its
Correct.
intent to be lead agency and then to send out the notice.
Correct.
You and I might be able to coordinate on when the notices.
Correct,
be
and
in
drafting
complete form.
letter and everything else.
But that's part of when the application is complete.
Yeah, I mean,
It's the same,
I think they understand. It doesn't have to be complete. I personally, I emailed them when I saw this document. And there's things missing when they're coming. And he said they'll be forthcoming. So this document, in my mind, in my experience, is not ready for other entities to get and be able to evaluate whether or not they should have a
we
concern.
already talked about that.
Yeah, that's all, and we're just reviewing that. That's all I had as far as this application. And I just want to tell the board, it doesn't matter, but I know you guys do care. They approached the city officials, they had meetings, sit down with Craig, they've been speaking to Andy Howard, they've been speaking with me. They have been, what do you want, what do you want, what do you want, we want to do this right. I just want the board to know that this has not been, that they've been slamming documents down us and saying, we want the approval right away. It's been the exact opposite, at least in my experience with the two attorneys. They've just been, what do you need, what do you need, what do you need, the whole time. And Craig and I have already been having some discussions about some other issues. Andy Howard's been involved when he needs to be. So there are some things that don't necessarily concern you that are going on behind the scene, but I just want you to know that they have been accommodating, at least thus far.
And we will continue to be. Great.
And then, just since we have Craig here, Craig, do you have anything that you'd like to say or add to this proceeding this evening?
No, as you can tell, I can start to lose my voice, so unless you got something specific to ask me, at this point, no, but as Mitch said, everything that has been proposed so far is in an approvable fashion with this board. I know there was comments that were made regarding zoning reviews and so forth. Mitch and I have to confirm that, but as of right now, the way I look at it, it's only this board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
All right, so we were going to have a discussion, but we're going to do this.